The Eriksson twins incident, 2008. In the early hours of a chilly autumn morning in 2008, a surreal and chilling incident unfolded on a busy motorway in the United Kingdom. It began with two young Swedish twins, Lisa and Linda Eriksson, stepping onto the road in a way that seemed to defy all reason. They ran directly into oncoming traffic. Miraculously, both survived, but what followed in the hours after would plunge their lives and everyone involved into a disturbing mystery that remains unresolved. The twins, identical in appearance but strikingly enigmatic in behavior, had come to the UK as part of a reality television project. They were filming a documentary about travel and youth culture, and their vibrant, outgoing personalities initially drew interest and intrigue. But as the cameras rolled, something strange began to emerge, a subtle shift in their demeanor that escalated into something deeply unsettling. On that fateful morning, witnesses on the motorway could barely believe what they were seeing. Two young women suddenly darted from the safety of the shoulder into the path of oncoming vehicles. Drivers slammed their brakes and swerved to avoid a collision. Some managed to stop just in time, others narrowly missed. The twins were fortunate not to be killed outright, a fact that seemed almost miraculous given the speed and volume of the traffic. Emergency responders arrived quickly, taking the twins to the hospital, but what should have been a straightforward rescue quickly turned bizarre. Both Lisa and Linda appeared disoriented and confused. Their speech was erratic, their movements unpredictable. Despite receiving medical attention, they displayed no clear explanation for their dangerous act. Within hours, the situation escalated dramatically. One of the twins, Lisa, vanished from the hospital under mysterious circumstances. She was later found in a remote part of the city, where she committed an act of violence that shocked everyone who heard about it. Lisa had killed a man in cold blood, a random victim with no apparent connection to her or her sister. The killing was brutal and senseless, raising urgent questions. What had caused Lisa to snap so violently? Was this a result of a psychotic break triggered by the trauma of the accident, or was something else at play? Her bizarre behavior before and after the incident baffled police, psychologists, and the public alike. Linda, meanwhile, remained under medical care, exhibiting signs of severe distress but no violence. Her condition suggested something psychological was affecting the twins, something that transcended ordinary explanations. The fact that the entire ordeal was captured on camera by the reality TV crew added a disturbing layer to the story. Viewers saw the twins' journey in real time, from their carefree travel adventures to the sudden descent into chaos. The footage was surreal, almost dreamlike, but the aftermath was nightmarish. Experts who analyzed the tapes proposed several theories. Some suggested the twins suffered from a shared psychosis, a rare condition where two closely bonded individuals develop a shared delusional state. Others speculated about drug use or exposure to environmental toxins, but nothing fit perfectly. The public was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. Headlines dubbed the event the Eriksson twins incident, and debates flared across forums and news outlets. Was this a case of mental illness gone unchecked, a tragic accident exacerbated by hidden trauma, or was there a darker, more mysterious force at work? Amid the media frenzy, questions about identity and the nature of madness took center stage. How could two people so alike physically experience such divergent fates in mere hours, one spiraling into violence, the other into silence and confusion? What does this say about the fragile boundary between sanity and insanity? Authorities faced immense pressure to provide answers. The legal process was complicated by Lisa's mental state. Was she criminally responsible for the killing, or was she incapacitated by a psychotic episode? Trials and evaluations dragged on, with experts divided on her competency and culpability. Linda's silence and apparent detachment only deepened the mystery. She refused to speak about the events, offering no insight into their shared experience or her sister's actions. Some psychologists believed she was protecting Lisa. Others thought she was trapped in her own psychological prison. Behind the headlines, the twins' family in Sweden struggled with grief and confusion. They expressed sorrow for the victim and bewilderment over the inexplicable changes in Lisa and Linda. Interviews revealed a family torn between hope for recovery and fear of what might lie ahead. As investigations continued, new details emerged about the twins' history. Some acquaintances reported unusual behaviors and mood swings in the months before their trip. There were whispers of substance abuse and emotional instability, though no clear diagnosis. But even with these clues, the incident remained an enigma. The sudden violence, the bizarre decision to run into traffic, the captured footage, all pointed to a breakdown in reality that defied simple explanation. In the years since, the Erickson twins incident has become a case study in psychological horror, a real-life drama that challenges our understanding of human behavior, mental health, and the unpredictable depths of the mind. It remains a chilling reminder of how thin the line is between order and chaos. The twins' story continues to be told, debated and studied, haunting those who seek to comprehend what truly happened on that motorway in 2008. And as with many mysteries of the mind, it leaves us with more questions than answers, questions about identity, connection, and the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of everyday life. After the shocking events on the motorway, the aftermath of the Erickson twins' bizarre behavior became the focus of intense scrutiny. Police investigations deepened, and psychologists scrambled to understand what could have driven Lisa and Linda to such extreme actions in such a short span of time. One of the first puzzling details was the twins' state immediately after the traffic incident. When emergency responders found them, Lisa and Linda were awake, but appeared disconnected from reality. They gave contradictory answers about why they had run into traffic. Some reports suggested that Lisa seemed angry, almost defiant, while Linda was withdrawn and unresponsive. The hospital stay that followed was anything but ordinary. While Linda remained under observation and was cooperative to a degree, Lisa's behavior quickly spiraled into erratic, frightening outbursts. Medical staff described moments where she would suddenly scream or become catatonic, as if trapped in a mental fog. Authorities soon realized that their actions had not only saved the twins' lives, but had also introduced them to a medical and legal system that would struggle to make sense of their mental state. The duality of their presentation, one violent, one silent, highlighted how differently trauma and psychosis can manifest, even in genetically identical individuals. The murder Lisa committed hours after surviving the highway incident added a tragic and complex layer to the case. The victim was a stranger, a man going about his routine life, whose only crime was crossing paths with Lisa at the wrong moment. Witnesses described the killing as sudden and brutal, with no clear motive. Investigators struggled to piece together Lisa's movements and mental state between leaving the hospital and the murder. CCTV footage showed her wandering aimlessly, muttering to herself, but no clear indication of what triggered the attack. Some suggested drug use, but toxicology reports revealed no substances in her system beyond prescribed medications. As the legal process unfolded, Lisa was charged with murder. Her defense team argued she was suffering from a severe psychotic episode and was not responsible for her actions. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculated and dangerous individual. The courtroom drama captivated the public, but only deepened the ambiguity around the twins. Meanwhile, Linda's silence became a focal point. Psychologists theorized that her refusal to engage with authorities was a coping mechanism, a form of dissociation in response to overwhelming trauma. Some suggested that she might have been suffering from folie à deux, shared psychosis, where the close bond between the twins allowed delusions or hallucinations to pass between them. Family members, interviewed privately, revealed that Lisa and Linda had a complicated history. While they were inseparable and deeply connected, there were reports of emotional instability dating back years. Friends spoke of moments when the twins seemed in another world, sometimes laughing or crying without apparent cause. Their upbringing in Sweden was described as loving but intense, with the twins reportedly relying heavily on each other for emotional support. Some psychologists speculate that such intense dependence can create fertile ground for shared mental disorders, especially under stress. The reality TV crew who had been filming the twins found themselves at the center of the storm. The footage they captured offered a rare and haunting glimpse into the twins' psychological unraveling, but questions arose about whether the pressures of filming and exposure had contributed to their breakdown. Critics argued that the production team failed to recognize or respond adequately to warning signs. They wondered if the quest for captivating television inadvertently pushed the twins toward their tragic fate. This debate tapped into broader concerns about the ethics of reality TV, the exploitation of vulnerable individuals, and the responsibilities of filmmakers in managing mental health crises. As the twins' story spread, public fascination turned to fear and speculation. Some theorized paranormal explanations, claiming that the twins were possessed or under some malevolent influence. Others saw it as a grim example of untreated mental illness. Experts caution against sensationalism, emphasizing the need for compassion and understanding. The Erickson twins incident, they say, is a stark example of how quickly mental health can deteriorate when support systems fail. Behind the scenes, therapists worked tirelessly with Linda, seeking to unlock the silence and help her process the trauma. Progress was slow and fragile, but glimpses of recovery offered hope. Lisa's trial proceeded amid intense media coverage. Mental health experts testified about her diagnosis, the signs of psychosis, and the possibility that she was not fully aware of her actions during the killing. The court ultimately ruled that Lisa was guilty but mentally ill, sentencing her to a secure psychiatric facility rather than prison. This decision sparked debate about justice, responsibility, and the treatment of mentally ill offenders. For the twins' family, the outcome was bittersweet. Relief that Lisa would receive care was tempered by the ongoing pain of loss, confusion, and stigma. In the years that followed, the case continued to be studied by psychiatrists and criminologists. It has become a reference point in discussions about shared psychosis, trauma, and the impact of media on mental health. The Erickson twins incident remains a cautionary tale about the unpredictable nature of the human mind and the fine line between tragedy and horror. It underscores the importance of early intervention, supportive care, and ethical media practices. Most of all, it reminds us that behind every headline is a human story marked by pain, mystery, and the search for understanding. As the media spotlight dimmed, the Erickson twins incident didn't fade into obscurity, but instead grew into a somber symbol of how mental health crises can explode into tragedy when left unaddressed. Behind the headlines, experts, families, and communities grappled with the complex questions raised by Lisa and Linda's descent. Mental health professionals involved in the case sought to unravel the tangled threads that bound the twins' experience. One of the most puzzling and haunting aspects was the apparent shared nature of their psychosis, known clinically as folie à deux. This rare condition, sometimes called shared delusional disorder, involves two individuals closely linked emotionally adopting the same or related delusions, reinforcing each other's distorted perceptions. In Lisa and Linda's case, the exact nature of their shared mental state was difficult to pin down. Was their psychosis purely psychological, stemming from trauma and emotional codependency? Or was it aggravated by external influences, stress, substance exposure, or perhaps the intense pressure of being filmed constantly by the reality TV crew? Psychiatrists interviewed about the case pointed out that shared psychosis can be devastatingly powerful. In many documented instances, one individual, typically the dominant partner, develops a psychotic disorder first, and the other adopts these beliefs and behaviors out of intense loyalty or fear of separation. Lisa, with her aggressive, erratic behavior, seemed to fit the profile of the primary patient, with Linda silently mirroring or absorbing the delusions in her own way. However, the twins' case was even more complex because they were genetically identical and extremely close emotionally. This closeness likely made their shared psychosis deeper and more resistant to treatment. Linda's withdrawal, refusal to communicate, and general dissociation suggested a protective retreat into herself to shield from the chaos surrounding her sister. Meanwhile, Lisa's aggressive outburst, the killing of a stranger after surviving the traffic incident, remained a grim focal point. Some specialists theorized that the traffic incident was a breaking point, a moment when the twins' fragile grip on reality snapped. For Lisa, this may have triggered a full psychotic break, resulting in violent behavior she later had little memory of. But many questions lingered. What caused the twins to step into traffic in the first place? Was it a shared hallucination or delusion that made the road seem safe or necessary to cross? Or was it an attempt to escape something real or imagined that felt unbearable? Witness testimonies provided few answers. Drivers described the twins as calm but oddly detached, almost like they were moving through a dream. One witness recalled Lisa smiling faintly as she stepped into the path of a car, as if unaware of the danger. Such details suggested a dissociative state, where awareness of reality is profoundly distorted. Back home in Sweden, the twins' family wrestled with grief and guilt. They questioned whether earlier interventions might have prevented the tragedy. They spoke of Lisa and Linda's inseparability, their shared joys, fears, and struggles. The twins had been known as inseparable partners, always supporting each other through life's challenges. This deep bond, while a source of strength, may have also become a trap, blurring the boundaries of individual identity and allowing the psychosis to spread like wildfire. Mental health experts caution that extreme emotional dependence can make people vulnerable to shared mental illnesses. The family's perspective offered a stark contrast to media portrayals that often sensationalized the incident. While headlines emphasized bizarre or violent behavior, the family emphasized compassion and the need to understand mental illness without stigma. Meanwhile, the reality TV production company faced criticism and scrutiny. Questions were raised about their responsibility for the twins' well-being during filming. Had they ignored signs of psychological distress? Did the pressures of filming contribute to their breakdown? Documentaries and articles revisiting the incident debated whether the presence of cameras might have intensified the twins' stress or even distorted their behavior. Critics accused the producers of exploiting vulnerable young women for ratings, while defenders argued they had no way to predict the tragic outcome. The incident sparked broader conversations about the ethics of reality television, particularly when dealing with mental health. The twins' story highlighted the dangers of combining entertainment with personal vulnerability and the importance of safeguards and support for participants. In clinical settings, the case fueled research and education about shared psychosis and trauma-related disorders. Mental health professionals emphasized the need for early detection and intervention, especially among individuals with intense emotional bonds. Lisa's treatment journey was difficult and fraught with setbacks. Institutionalized in a secure psychiatric facility, she faced the challenge of managing severe psychosis, while also grappling with the consequences of her actions. Some days she showed progress, responding to therapy and medication. Other days she retreated into silence or episodes of aggression. Linda's recovery was slower and less visible. She remained largely non-verbal, her trauma manifesting as deep withdrawal. Therapists focused on creating a safe space for her to gradually rebuild trust and reclaim her own identity apart from her sister. As years passed, the twins' case became a tragic example for mental health advocates. Their story illustrated the complexity of psychiatric disorders that don't fit neatly into categories, where genetics, environment, trauma, and social factors intertwine in unpredictable ways. The public fascination with the incident, fueled by the original footage and the mystery surrounding the murder, began to shift toward a more empathetic understanding. Documentaries and podcasts revisiting the story emphasized the human toll rather than sensational details. Yet, unanswered questions linger. What was going through Lisa and Linda's minds in those moments on the motorway? Did they hear voices or see visions that compelled them forward? Could they have been saved if someone had intervened earlier? The twins' story serves as a haunting reminder of how quickly lives can unravel and how complex mental illness can be. It challenges us to look beyond headlines and judgments and consider the fragile humanity at the heart of tragedy. For many who followed the case, the Erickson twins incident remains a cautionary tale about the need for compassion, vigilance, and understanding in the face of mental health crises. It is a story that lingers, unsettling and unresolved, reminding us of the fine line between sanity and madness, and how easily that line can blur. The final chapter of the Erickson twins incident unfolded in the courtrooms and psychiatric institutions where justice and care collided. Lisa's trial became a focal point for discussions about mental illness, accountability, and how the law should treat those whose minds betray them. The prosecution's case painted a grim picture of a young woman who, despite her strange behavior, was still responsible for the brutal killing of an innocent man.
They argued that Lisa's actions were deliberate, emphasizing the violence and the terror of the attack. Witnesses described the horror they felt, underscoring the need for justice for the victim and his family. However, the defense mounted a powerful counterpoint. Mental health experts testified extensively about Lisa's psychotic state at the time of the murder. They described how psychosis can distort perception so profoundly that actions no longer align with reality or intent. Lisa's diagnosis of schizophrenia was emphasized, alongside evidence that she was disconnected from the world around her, trapped in hallucinations and delusions. The court faced the difficult task of weighing these complex realities. How do you punish an act committed by someone whose sense of reality is fractured? The law struggles to navigate this terrain, balancing public safety, compassion, and fairness. Ultimately, Lisa was found guilty but mentally ill, a verdict recognizing her diminished responsibility due to her psychosis. Instead of prison, she was sentenced to treatment in a high-security psychiatric hospital, where she could receive care tailored to her condition. For many observers, this verdict was bittersweet. It acknowledged the tragedy of mental illness, but left lingering questions about justice and closure. The victim's family expressed a mix of sorrow and frustration, grieving their loss while grappling with the reality that the killer was a young woman suffering from severe mental illness. Linda's path after the trial was quieter, but no less poignant. She remained under care, her silence a testament to the deep scars left by trauma and shared psychosis. Therapists continued to work patiently with her, hoping that someday she might find a way to reclaim her voice and identity beyond the shadow of her sister's actions. The twins' family sought healing amid the wreckage of public scrutiny and private grief. They advocated for mental health awareness, speaking openly about their experiences to reduce stigma and encourage early intervention for those struggling with psychosis or emotional distress. Their story prompted wider reflection on how society supports or fails those at the edge of mental health crises. Many experts called for better access to mental health services, improved training for first responders, and more compassionate community responses. The reality TV production company faced ongoing criticism and legal questions. While they were never held legally responsible for the twins' breakdown, the ethical debate they sparked led to changes in how vulnerable participants are protected on reality shows. Industry guidelines evolved, emphasizing mental health screenings, crisis intervention plans, and responsible editing to avoid exploitation. The surreal footage of Lisa and Linda running into traffic remains haunting, a visual reminder of how mental illness can manifest unpredictably and tragically. It is often used in educational contexts to illustrate shared psychosis and the challenges of psychiatric care. In the broader cultural imagination, the Erickson twins incident became emblematic of the blurred lines between sanity and madness. It inspired books, documentaries, and discussions that seek to understand, not sensationalize, the fragile, complex nature of the human mind. Some speculate about what might have happened if the twins had received help earlier, or if the pressures of fame and filming had been absent. These questions fuel ongoing debates about prevention, treatment, and the role of society in supporting mental health. Ultimately, the Erickson twins incident is a somber, cautionary tale. It shows how the closest bonds can sometimes be the most dangerous, how shared minds can unravel together, and how tragedy can spring from the depths of the unseen mental battles waged within. For Lisa and Linda Erickson, their story is one of mystery, heartbreak, and the desperate hope that with understanding and care, such tragedies can be prevented in the future.
The vanishing. The disappearance of Sneha Ann Phillip. On the morning of September 10th, 2001, Sneha Ann Phillip left her apartment in Lower Manhattan, seemingly headed for another day at the hospital where she was training as a resident doctor. She was 31 years old, a first-generation Indian American who had worked hard to build a career in medicine and a life in New York City. Everyone who knew her described her as intelligent, driven, and warm-hearted. She was proud of her heritage, yet determined to carve out her own path in a demanding profession far from her parents' native India. Her life was not without pressures. Balancing the expectations of family with the stress of a medical residency was a delicate act, but she was coping. On that morning, She seemed like any other young professional on the cusp of a promising future. Her modest apartment was neat, her belongings orderly, and her social circle steady. Nothing about that day gave any hint that it would mark the beginning of one of the most enduring mysteries tied to the tragedy of 9/11. As she left her apartment building, the city around her buzzed with the usual chaos of New York life. The sounds of honking taxis, hurried footsteps, and distant sirens filled the air. The streets were crowded with office workers, tourists, and street vendors setting up for the day. For many, September 10th was just another day, unaware that it would be the last day many would see loved ones. Sneha's final confirmed movements that day are shrouded in uncertainty. Some accounts claim she was seen near the World Trade Center complex, while others place her at or near the hospital where she worked. No one can confirm exactly where she was at any given moment. Her cell phone stopped transmitting signals that day, and it was later discovered that her phone line was disconnected abruptly, adding an eerie layer to the timeline. Her bank accounts showed no activity, no withdrawals or charges after that date, leaving investigators puzzled. When the terrorist attacks occurred on September 11th, the city was plunged into chaos and grief. Thousands were missing, buried beneath rubble or unaccounted for amidst the collapse of the Twin Towers. Amid this human catastrophe, Sneha's name appeared on several lists of victims. The authorities and media assumed she was among those who had died in the towers. Her family mourned her as a victim of the tragedy, even though no remains were ever identified as hers. But questions began to arise. How could there be no physical evidence of her death when so many others were identified? Why did her phone stop working before the attacks? Why were some witnesses saying she was last seen days earlier, and others placing her near locations unrelated to the disaster? Some friends and family suspected that she might have disappeared before 9/11, and that her death, or disappearance, had nothing to do with the attacks at all. The lack of clarity around Sneha's final moments created an unsettling atmosphere around her story. The chaos of 9/11 made it difficult to investigate thoroughly, and in the swirl of so many missing people, her case was often overlooked or assumed closed. Yet the contradictions in her timeline fueled speculation and grief for years to come. In the immediate aftermath, the assumption was that Sneha had perished in the attacks. For her family, the hope for answers was replaced by grief, but also confusion. They could not reconcile the lack of any physical evidence with the belief that she had been a victim of the tower's collapse. Some began to wonder if perhaps Sneha had disappeared before the towers fell, that she might have died or been harmed in another way. The mystery deepened as authorities struggled to piece together the final days of her life. Without concrete evidence of her whereabouts on September 11th, questions about the circumstances of her disappearance remained unanswered. Did she leave work early that day? Was she ever in the towers? Could she have been a victim of a crime? Or had she chosen to vanish entirely? What makes Sneha Ann Phillips' story so compelling is the eerie intersection of personal tragedy and national disaster. Her case sits at a crossroads where the overwhelming scale of the 9/11 attacks overshadowed the intimate and unanswered questions of an individual life. She became a symbol of the countless missing persons whose stories were lost or forgotten amid the larger catastrophe. Sneha's disappearance reminds us that even in the face of history's greatest tragedies, individual lives, complex, layered and unresolved, continue to demand our attention. As we move forward in this story, it's important to remember that behind the headlines and statistics, there was a young woman with hopes, dreams and a life suddenly interrupted. The search for truth about what happened to Sneha Ann Phillips continues to captivate and haunt those who knew her and those who seek justice in the shadows of 9/11. After the dust settled on the tragic events of September 11th, 2001, the city of New York was left grappling with an unimaginable loss. Among the thousands missing and presumed dead was Sneha Ann Phillips, a promising young doctor whose disappearance quickly became tangled in the chaotic aftermath of the attacks. For her family and friends, the tragedy of the day was compounded by a gnawing uncertainty about what had really happened to her. In the days and weeks following 9/11, the official assumption was that Sneha had been in or near the World Trade Center when the plane struck. Her name appeared on victim lists compiled by hospitals and authorities, and her family mourned her as if she had died alongside thousands of others. Yet as the initial shock wore off, troubling questions began to emerge. Despite exhaustive searches, no remains were ever identified as Sneha's. The painstaking recovery efforts sifted through tons of debris, but nothing confirmed her presence at the towers during the attacks. This lack of physical evidence sparked confusion and disbelief among those closest to her. How could someone who worked nearby and was known to be in the area simply vanish without a trace? Adding to the mystery was the puzzling fact that Sneha's cell phone records showed her phone was disconnected on September 10th, the day before the attacks. No calls or messages were made from her number after that point. Moreover, her bank accounts and credit cards showed no activity after that date, unusual for someone living independently in New York City. These discrepancies clashed with the initial narrative and hinted at a different timeline altogether. As investigators began to examine the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, they encountered a tangled web of conflicting accounts and scant evidence. Some witnesses claimed to have seen Sneha on the morning of September 10th, near her apartment, or on her way to work. Others reported spotting her in the vicinity of the World Trade Center complex that day. But beyond that, the trail quickly went cold. The phone mystery deepened when authorities discovered calls had been made from landlines and phone numbers not associated with Sneha's usual contacts. Some of these calls appeared to come from locations she had no known connection to. It was unclear whether these were attempts to reach her, or something more sinister. Her family speculated that someone might have tampered with her phone, or that she had been forced off the grid. Behind these facts lay a growing unease within her family. They remembered that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Sneha had seemed unusually stressed and withdrawn. There were reports of strange unexplained phone calls to her mother's house from unknown numbers. Friends recalled that she had expressed concerns about people she didn't trust and hinted at personal troubles she wasn't ready to share. Some began to suspect that Sneha's disappearance was not an accident or a direct consequence of the terrorist attacks, but something more troubling. Was it possible she had been a victim of foul play? Had she tried to disappear voluntarily to escape problems, or was there another explanation entirely? Unfortunately, the enormity of the 9/11's disaster complicated any attempt to investigate fully. Law enforcement and emergency services were stretched thin, prioritizing rescue, recovery, and counter-terrorism efforts. Missing person cases unrelated to the attacks were often sidelined or closed prematurely. The chaos created a perfect storm for Sneha's story to be lost in the shuffle. Determined not to let her story fade into obscurity, Sneha's family took matters into their own hands. They hired private investigators to dig deeper, combing through records and re-interviewing witnesses. They fought bureaucratic resistance, petitioning police and government agencies to reopen the case and grant access to critical information. The family's efforts uncovered more contradictions. Some neighbors and co-workers gave conflicting statements about when and where Sneha had been seen in the days before 9/11. Her apartment remained undisturbed for weeks after she vanished, with her belongings still inside, including personal documents, clothing and other items. Nothing suggested she had planned to leave voluntarily. Some of the evidence was circumstantial, but it painted a troubling picture. The fact that Sneha's phone was cut off before the attacks, the lack of activity on her financial accounts, and the mysterious calls to her family raised suspicions that something had happened to her earlier, something that no one had wanted to acknowledge. Yet, despite the family's relentless pursuit of the truth, official investigations remained inconclusive. Authorities maintained that there was no evidence to suggest foul play, and that Sneha was presumed dead as a victim of the attacks. Some critics argued that this conclusion was convenient, allowing the case to be closed without a thorough inquiry. As the years passed, Sneha's disappearance became emblematic of the many individual tragedies that were overshadowed by the enormity of 9/11's. Her story touched on deep questions about how history remembers victims and how personal mysteries can be buried beneath national catastrophes. It raised concerns about justice, truth, and the fragility of memory. Through interviews, media coverage and advocacy, Sneha's family kept her story alive. They pleaded for anyone with information to come forward, hoping to unravel the last pieces of the puzzle. They refused to accept the ambiguity, and insisted that her disappearance deserved its own investigation, separate from the disaster narrative.
Sneha's case also brought attention to how missing person investigations can be compromised in times of crisis. It underscored the importance of treating each disappearance with care and thoroughness, even when overshadowed by larger events. For those who knew her, Sneha was more than a name on a list. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a dedicated professional whose life was cut tragically short, or lost under mysterious circumstances. Her disappearance remains a haunting reminder that behind every headline is a story waiting to be told fully. In exploring Sneha Ann Phillips' case, we confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the official story does not capture the whole truth. We are reminded that every victim of tragedy deserves to be remembered as an individual, not just a statistic. And above all, we see how the pursuit of justice and truth can persist, even in the darkest shadows of history. As years passed, the mystery of Sneha Ann Phillips' disappearance remained unresolved. Her family's relentless search for answers faced many roadblocks, official agencies reluctant to re-examine the case, the absence of clear evidence, and the fading memories of witnesses. Yet, their determination never wavered. They believed that beneath the official assumption that Sneha had perished in the Twin Towers, there lay a story far more complicated and tragic. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case was the conflicting witness accounts about Sneha's whereabouts before and on September 11th. Some co-workers recalled seeing her at the hospital during the morning of the 10th, carrying out her usual duties. Others said she appeared distracted, almost preoccupied. There were mentions of a heated phone call she had that day, though no one knew who was on the other end. The stress of her medical residency, combined with personal pressures, seemed to weigh heavily on her. Meanwhile, the last confirmed sighting of Sneha became a subject of debate. Some witnesses claimed to have seen her near the World Trade Center complex early on the morning of September 11th, while others suggested she was nowhere near the towers at the time of the attacks. This contradiction complicated attempts to place her definitively among the victims of 9/11s. Adding to the complexity was the fact that no official record placed Sneha inside the Twin Towers when the planes hit. She was not logged in at her hospital during the morning of the attacks, nor did any colleagues recall her being present. If she was near the towers, no one could verify it beyond speculation. Her family's private investigators began digging into her phone records, bank statements, and personal contacts. They uncovered that her phone had been disconnected on September 10th, the day before the attacks, an unusual move for someone so connected to her professional and social circles. Why had the phone line gone dead? Was it cut off voluntarily, or had someone else intervened? These questions fueled a growing suspicion. Could Sneha have disappeared before the attacks, under circumstances unrelated to terrorism? Her family considered the possibility that she may have been a victim of foul play, an accident, or even an intentional vanishing. But without concrete evidence, they were left with more questions than answers. The investigators also discovered troubling signs in her personal life. Friends revealed that Sneha had been dealing with emotional difficulties, including depression and feelings of isolation. Some hinted at a troubled relationship with her boyfriend at the time. While none of these issues pointed directly to her disappearance, they suggested she was under significant stress. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence came from Sneha's apartment itself. When authorities searched the unit weeks after she vanished, her belongings remained untouched, clothes neatly folded, personal documents intact. No sign she had planned to leave or return. There was no note, no explanation, just a silence that spoke volumes. Despite the lack of physical evidence, her family refused to accept that Sneha's fate was sealed by the 9/11's attacks alone. They pressed authorities for further investigation, seeking help from advocacy groups and the media. They hoped to shine a light on the gaps in the official story and encourage witnesses to come forward. Media coverage of Sneha's case brought renewed public interest and scrutiny. Journalists examined the inconsistencies and called attention to the challenges of investigating disappearances during large-scale disasters. Some speculated about the possibility of a cover-up or institutional negligence, though no definitive proof emerged. As the years stretched on, the story of Sneha Ann Phillips became a symbol of unresolved loss, a poignant reminder that even amidst the greatest tragedies, personal mysteries can be overlooked. Her case underscored the emotional toll on families forced to live in uncertainty, caught between mourning and hope. Her disappearance also sparked discussions about how missing persons cases are handled during crises. Advocates argued that the overwhelming focus on mass casualties can inadvertently cause individual cases to be neglected. They called for reforms in record keeping, communication between agencies, and public transparency. In the absence of official closure, Sneha's family turned to remembrance and advocacy. They shared her story widely, hoping to preserve her memory and bring attention to the unresolved questions. They urged anyone with information, no matter how small, to come forward. The case also raised deeper questions about identity and narrative. Sneha was a young woman straddling two cultures, caught between the expectations of her immigrant family and the realities of life in a demanding profession. Her disappearance became a metaphor for the complexities of assimilation, ambition, and vulnerability. Despite the passage of time, the search for answers continued. Each new lead, each re-examination of evidence, offered a glimmer of hope that the truth might one day emerge. But with every unanswered question, the shadow of ambiguity grew longer. Sneha Ann Phillips' disappearance remains one of the many personal tragedies woven into the fabric of 9/11's aftermath. It reminds us that behind every statistic is a life interrupted, a family left searching, and a story waiting to be told. Over 2 decades since Sneha Ann Phillip vanished, her case still haunts those who knew her and perplexes those who study it. The official stance remains that she was a victim of the September 11th attacks, presumed dead in the destruction of the Twin Towers. But for her family and many who have examined the details, that explanation never felt complete. In the years following her disappearance, several attempts were made to reopen investigations. Police files were reviewed, new forensic techniques applied, and missing persons databases combed for clues. Yet despite these efforts, no new physical evidence came to light that could definitively clarify her fate. One persistent theory centers on the possibility that Sneha disappeared voluntarily, possibly overwhelmed by personal pressures or mental health struggles. Some friends and family members believed that the emotional weight she carried might have led her to seek escape, perhaps by disappearing or worse. But this theory has been met with resistance. Sneha was known as a dedicated professional, deeply connected to her family, and had no history of vanishing without notice. Another speculation considers the chance that Sneha fell victim to foul play before the attacks. Given the mysterious phone disconnections and conflicting witness statements, some believe that her disappearance was unrelated to 9/11, and that the tragedy only obscured what truly happened. Yet no concrete evidence of a crime has ever surfaced, leaving this possibility in the realm of suspicion rather than proof. Sneha's story also highlights the challenges faced by authorities during catastrophic events. The chaos of 9/11's overwhelmed emergency services, stretched resources thin, and created gaps in communication. Many missing persons were presumed dead quickly, without thorough investigations. Records were incomplete, and witness testimonies often contradictory. The effect of this was not just procedural, but profoundly human. Families like Sneha's were left in limbo, unable to achieve closure or honor their loved ones fully. The lines between grief, hope and uncertainty blurred into an agonizing haze. Over time, the story became a focal point for discussions about how society handles loss and memory in the shadow of collective tragedy. It raised ethical questions about how victims are identified and commemorated when evidence is lacking. It challenged the assumption that large-scale disasters explain away every individual's fate. In recent years, the conversation around Sneha Ann Phillips' case has grown more nuanced. Documentaries, articles and advocacy groups have kept the dialogue alive. They remind the public that beneath the monumental event of 9/11 are countless personal stories, some clear and some lost in shadows. Her family's persistence has also inspired changes in policy and practice. There is now greater awareness about the importance of dedicated missing persons investigations, even during large emergencies. Efforts to improve interagency cooperation, record keeping, and victim identification have been implemented, aiming to prevent future cases from slipping through the cracks. Despite all this, The central mystery remains what truly happened to Sneha and Philip. Was she caught in the destruction of the towers, lost forever in the carnage? Did she disappear before the attacks under circumstances still unknown? Or did something else, perhaps more sinister, intervene in her fate? The lack of a definitive answer means her story is still open-ended, a puzzle that invites reflection. It challenges us to consider how we seek truth amid tragedy, and how memories shape our understanding of loss. Sneha's disappearance also serves as a reminder of the fragility of life and the limits of our knowledge. It teaches us about the resilience of families who refuse to give up, the importance of questioning accepted narratives, and the need for compassion in the face of uncertainty. Today, Sneha and Philip is remembered not only as a victim of one of history's darkest days, but as a person with dreams, struggles, and a life unjustly cut short or erased. Her story remains a silent call to honor those who vanish without explanation, and to never stop searching for the truth. In the end, the mystery of Sneha's disappearance is a mirror reflecting the complex interplay of personal tragedy and historical catastrophe. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that not all stories have neat endings, and that some truths remain just beyond our reach. But the search continues, through memory, advocacy, and hope, because every life deserves to be remembered in full, not just as part of a larger disaster, but as a singular story, with meaning, mystery, and enduring humanity.
The mysterious death of Phoebe Hansjuk, a locked room tragedy. It was December 2nd, 2010, a warm summer evening in Melbourne, Australia. As residents of the luxury Balancer apartment complex went about their day, the quiet hum of city life carried on as usual. Balancer, with its curving modern architecture and high-rise skyline views, was the kind of place you moved into when you'd made it. A place where security was tight, hallways were silent, and privacy was part of the price tag. But inside the building, something had gone terribly wrong. At approximately 7 p.m., a cleaner entered the refuse collection room at the base of the building, level B1, the basement, only to be met with a scene of horror. Amid the broken shards of glass and the stench of garbage, there lay the body of a young woman. She was slumped awkwardly on the ground, partially inside a trash compactor. Her legs were bloodied and contorted, one shoe missing, surrounded by scattered debris. The body belonged to 24-year-old Phoebe Hansjuk, and she hadn't walked into the refuse room. She had come down from the 12th floor, through the garbage chute. Phoebe Hansjuk was no stranger to the Balancer building. She lived there in apartment 1201 with her boyfriend, Anthony Hampel, a wealthy and well-connected events promoter nearly 20 years her senior. Their relationship had always raised eyebrows. He was older, polished, a man with elite ties in Melbourne's social scene. She, by contrast, was artistic, troubled, magnetic, and vulnerable. Phoebe was known to her friends and family as sensitive, creative, and loving. But she also had her demons. She had struggled with depression, anxiety, and alcohol dependence. She journaled compulsively. She had even been on medication for mental health. But the picture painted by those closest to her wasn't that of a woman spiraling out of control. It was that of someone fighting to get her life on track. The police were quick to arrive at the Balancer complex that evening. So too were paramedics, forensic investigators, and eventually the coroner's team. The scene was disturbing. Phoebe had suffered horrific injuries. Her foot had been severed, her leg almost cut in two, and she had bled out at the scene. But the most puzzling detail was how she had gotten there in the first place. The garbage chute on the 12th floor was a narrow metal shaft, approximately 400 millimeters wide, just under 16 inches. That's barely enough space for a human body, and certainly not an easy fit. And yet, the working theory from the outset was that Phoebe had voluntarily climbed into the chute, feet first, and fallen 12 floors to her death. It sounded improbable, even implausible. The narrative built by investigators was straightforward. On the afternoon of December 2nd, Phoebe had been alone in the apartment. Anthony, her boyfriend, claimed he had left for work early and had not seen her again until the police informed him of her death that evening. Security footage showed Phoebe in the building's elevator at around 11:44 a.m., wearing gym clothes and holding a green Kohl's shopping bag. She appeared unsteady on her feet. Witnesses later described her behavior as disoriented. It was later revealed that she had consumed alcohol that morning. A toxicology report would show that her blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal driving limit, dangerously high. And there were traces of zolpidem, a strong sleeping aid known by its brand name Stilnox. From these facts, the police concluded that Phoebe had likely experienced a mental health crisis while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Perhaps she was attempting suicide. Perhaps she was intoxicated and confused. Either way, the theory was that she somehow climbed into the narrow chute and fell. But as the hours passed, those who knew Phoebe began to raise serious doubts. First, there was the issue of the chute itself. It wasn't just narrow, it was practically inhuman to enter. It was mounted 1.2 meters above the ground, waist high, and required the chute door to be held open while climbing inside backward. Then the body would have to fold itself in, legs tucked in, feet first. The possibility of someone doing this while drunk and sedated seemed at best highly unlikely. At worst, it seemed absurd. Second, there was no fingerprint evidence on the garbage chute handle. Not Phoebe's, not anyone's. Investigators claimed the surface may have been wiped down. But why? Third, there were no signs of blood or injury inside the apartment itself. If Phoebe had injured herself trying to get into the chute, an awkward and likely painful process, where was the evidence? And most chilling of all, some early responders said there were bruises on her arms, suggestive of restraint. Attention quickly turned to Anthony Hampel, Phoebe's boyfriend. His background was notable, a successful professional in the entertainment world. Anthony's father was a former Supreme Court judge, and his mother a county court judge. He had friends in high places, lawyers, police, public officials. In the hours after Phoebe's death, Anthony's behavior raised eyebrows. He called Phoebe's family to deliver the news, not the police. He seemed cold, mechanical, even clinical in his words. He also hired a lawyer before giving a statement to police. And when he did give a statement, it was notably lacking in detail. He claimed that Phoebe had been asleep when he left for work. He hadn't spoken to her all day. He came home at 6 p.m. to find the apartment empty and a broken glass on the floor. An odd sight, but one he didn't immediately act on. Then there was the computer. When investigators checked the apartment, Phoebe's laptop had been wiped clean. Her browsing history, emails and files, gone. No one could say when this had happened, or who had done it. But it added a troubling new layer to the mystery. Phoebe's family was unconvinced by the official story. They believed their daughter had been harmed, whether by another person or as a result of negligence. They pointed to her journals, where she often expressed distress about her relationship. There were accounts of fights, of manipulation, and of emotional control. Her grandfather, a retired police detective, publicly doubted the theory of suicide or accidental death. "I don't believe for 1 minute she climbed into that chute alone," he told reporters. "Something happened in that apartment, and she ended up in that chute because someone else put her there." Still, without clear evidence of foul play, police and the coroner held to the accidental death theory. A formal inquest would eventually be held, but not until years later. And by that point, many felt that critical evidence had already been lost or overlooked. In the aftermath, what lingered was the surreal image of it all. A young woman, bright, troubled, artistic, ending her life not on a street or in a bed, but in the darkness of a garbage shaft. It didn't make sense, not emotionally, not physically. And the more people looked, the more they found holes in the story. Before the headlines, before the garbage chute, before the unanswered questions that still hang in the air like smoke, there was Phoebe Handsjuk, a young woman with a messy kind of beauty, the kind you don't forget. Wild hair, restless eyes, and a magnetic smile that drew people in. She was born in 1986 in Melbourne, Australia, into a loving if unconventional family. Her mother, Natalie, was a teacher and artist. Her father, Len, a psychiatrist. Though they divorced when Phoebe was young, both remained active in her life. She was the middle child of 3, creative from the start, often scribbling drawings or dancing barefoot through the house. Phoebe was a free spirit, emotional, impulsive, generous to a fault. But from an early age, it was also clear that she felt things deeply, more deeply than most. Her inner world was vast and intense, and as she grew older, that emotional depth began to turn in on itself. Anxiety, melancholy, a sense of being unmoored. Her teenage years were marked by internal conflict. At one point, Phoebe wrote in her journal that she often felt like a fractured soul. It wasn't melodrama, it was how she experienced the world. By the time she reached adulthood, those internal battles had taken shape. Struggles with alcohol, self-esteem and mental health. She began seeing a therapist. At times she took medication to manage her moods, but there were stretches, long stretches, where she was doing well, working, painting, studying, volunteering, loving deeply. She had a weakness for stray animals, for broken people, for lovers who promised more than they could deliver. In 2009, Phoebe met Anthony Hampel, and her life took a sharp turn. To understand their relationship is to understand the first domino. Anthony, Tony to his friends, was 41 years old when they met. Sophisticated, wealthy, clean-cut, he was a respected events promoter, the kind of man who threw lavish parties for elite clients. His parents were both judges, his friends were politicians, lawyers, and media figures. Phoebe was 23, curious, artistic, a little lost, and craving something, perhaps security, perhaps love. They were from different worlds, but the chemistry was immediate. To outsiders, Anthony represented stability. His apartment was spotless, minimalist, cold. Phoebe, on the other hand, was warmth and chaos. Their relationship was an orbit, her spinning wild, him centered and composed. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Phoebe's friends noticed changes. She became more withdrawn, more anxious. There were fights, loud ones. Phoebe often confided in her family that she didn't feel entirely safe, not physically, but emotionally. She felt controlled, monitored. There were rules. She wasn't to drink too much. She wasn't to be too dramatic. At one point, Anthony allegedly insisted she stop seeing her therapist, and instead use his preferred practitioner. It wasn't overt abuse. It was subtler, a slow erosion of self, and for someone already struggling with mental health, the effects were amplified. Phoebe began to journal extensively during this time. Her writings are raw, often poetic, and filled with longing. She wanted to be stronger. She wanted to get her life together. She wrote about leaving Anthony, about starting over, about becoming a better version of herself. In one chilling passage, she wrote, "I feel like a bird caught in a net, and the more I try to free myself, the tighter it wraps around me." In the weeks leading up to her death, there were signs something was about to break. She had recently moved out of Anthony's apartment for a few days, staying with her mother and friends. She confided that she was planning to leave him for good. She'd applied for jobs. She was talking about going back to school. Her family remembers her sounding hopeful, energized, determined. But then, as often happens in relationships with power imbalances, she went back. Phoebe returned to apartment 1201 just a few days before her death. No one knows exactly what changed her mind. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was love, or maybe it was that irresistible pull of the familiar, even when it hurts. There was one particularly haunting incident. Just 2 nights before she died, Phoebe had a heated argument with Anthony. She then sent an email to several people, including herself, at 12:03 a.m. The subject line, "Goodbye." In the body of the email, she apologized for being a burden, and wrote that she was going to end her life. Her father, Len, received the message, and immediately called Anthony, who assured him Phoebe was fine. He said she was just upset, and had already gone to bed. The incident was brushed off. No one called emergency services. No welfare check was done. The following morning, Phoebe downplayed the email. She told her family and friends that she'd had a bad night, that it was a mistake, that she was okay now, and maybe at that moment, she was. But the shadow of that message would return. Less than 48 hours later, December 2nd, 2010, began like any other day. Phoebe was seen on CCTV just before noon, taking the elevator down, looking disoriented but alive. She was wearing active wear, carrying a shopping bag, and heading toward the ground floor. Then for over 5 hours, nothing. No camera footage, no audio, just a black hole in time. At 7 p.m.,
Her body would be discovered in the garbage room. The official narrative paints those lost hours as a haze of intoxication. They say she drank vodka, took sleeping pills, wandered the apartment. They say she voluntarily got into the garbage chute and fell to her death. But that version never sat right with her family. Because Phoebe had so many reasons to live. Because she was finally planning her escape from a relationship that drained her. Because the mechanics of the chute made her entry nearly impossible. Because her blood found in small traces near the apartment door suggested a struggle or an injury before the fall. Because her beloved dog, Yoshi, was still in the apartment and hadn't been walked or fed. And most of all, because the woman who wrote about hope, about healing, and about leaving, didn't seem like someone ready to die. She seemed like someone on the brink of something new. But instead of a new beginning, Phoebe Hancock's story came to an abrupt and violent end. And in its place, a storm of grief, speculation, and legal roadblocks took root. Her family demanded answers. They pushed for an inquest. They raised questions the police didn't seem to want to ask. Why was the scene not treated as suspicious from the start? Why wasn't Anthony Hampel formally interviewed under caution? Why wasn't the building's security system fully analyzed? Why was Phoebe's laptop wiped? Why did the coroner rule it an accident so quickly? The more they pushed, the more resistance they met. When Phoebe Hancock's body was found at the bottom of the garbage chute in her luxury Melbourne apartment, police quickly classified the death as an accident. The official story was that she had, while intoxicated and disoriented, voluntarily climbed into the chute, slipped and tragically fell to her death. But from the start, the physical evidence and timeline told a different, more puzzling story. The crime scene, a locked room mystery apartment, 1201 in the Palladium complex, was where Phoebe lived with Anthony Hampel. The building was ultra secure, with restricted access and surveillance cameras, but curiously, the footage around the time of her disappearance was incomplete, several hours missing. CCTV cameras in the hallways did not capture any unusual activity. No neighbors reported hearing screams or disturbances. The garbage chute itself was narrow, steep and dangerous. It was designed for trash bags, not people. Access was restricted by a small metal door, usually locked or secured. To get inside, a person would have to push the door open and then drop into the chute shaft. The question, how likely was it that Phoebe climbed in voluntarily? The fall. Phoebe's body was discovered face down at the bottom of the chute, a space barely big enough to hold her. The fall was about 18 meters, roughly the height of a 6-story building. The force would have been catastrophic. Forensic experts found evidence that Phoebe had consumed alcohol and sleeping pills that day, consistent with the narrative of intoxication and confusion. But the blood alcohol level in her system was not unusually high, contradicting early media reports that she was heavily intoxicated. Additionally, traces of blood were found near the apartment door, far from the chute, indicating a possible injury or struggle before she entered the garbage room. This blood was never fully explained. The missing time and conflicting witness statements. Phoebe was last seen on CCTV around noon heading down to the ground floor. For the next 5 hours, there was no video or eyewitness report placing her anywhere. Police timeline is vague. She supposedly wandered the building, drank alcohol, and took sleeping pills during this period. Anthony Hampel was present in the apartment during this time, but offered an inconsistent account. He claimed Phoebe was upset and incoherent, but made no effort to seek help or call emergency services. Some neighbors reported hearing noises around the apartment late in the afternoon, but no one saw Phoebe enter the garbage chute. Why was there no recorded attempt by Phoebe to contact anyone during these critical hours? The forensics and the mystery of the laptop. Perhaps the most baffling detail came from Phoebe's laptop. It was found wiped clean, a rare event considering Phoebe was known to be tech-savvy, but not secretive. Investigators speculated this could have been an attempt to destroy evidence or personal files that could explain her state of mind. But who wiped it? Was it Phoebe herself, or someone else? Her family believes the laptop's deletion was suspicious, and possibly orchestrated by someone close to her. Anthony Hampel's role under scrutiny. Anthony Hampel became a central figure in the investigation, though never charged. His behavior raised eyebrows. At the inquest, questions were asked about his control over Phoebe's social life, his insistence on choosing her therapists, and his reluctance to involve police or emergency services the night of her disappearance. One witness testified that Anthony had previously been controlling and jealous. Others noted his cool, detached demeanor after Phoebe's death, which many found unsettling. Moreover, Hampel's failure to notify emergency services immediately after Phoebe's disappearance was heavily criticized. Instead, he reportedly waited several hours before reporting her missing. The coroner's inquest and public outcry. In 2013, 3 years after Phoebe's death, a coronial inquest was held to re-examine the circumstances. The coroner concluded Phoebe's death was accidental, ruling that she voluntarily entered the chute while intoxicated. Despite family objections and forensic inconsistencies, the official verdict stood. Her family was devastated. They felt the investigation was superficial, overlooking key evidence and ignoring suspicious circumstances. The inquest did not explore the possibility of foul play in depth. The unanswered questions: how did Phoebe, physically small and inexperienced, manage to climb into a garbage chute designed to be dangerous, even for trash bags? Why was there no security footage capturing her entry? Why did the apartment door have traces of blood unrelated to the fall? Who wiped her laptop? And why? Why did Anthony Hampel delay notifying authorities? Why did the police seem to accept the accident narrative so quickly? Public reaction and media frenzy. The case caught the imagination of true crime enthusiasts and media outlets worldwide. Articles, podcasts and documentaries have debated whether Phoebe's death was a tragic accident, suicide, or murder staged to look like an accident. Many experts argue that the timeline and physical evidence point to a struggle and possible foul play. Others say the mental health angle cannot be ignored. The legacy Phoebe Hanstuk's death continues to haunt her family and community. Her story is not just about one tragic night, but about the broader issues of mental health, domestic control, and the justice system's limitations. Her parents have become vocal advocates for better investigation procedures in suspicious deaths, especially those involving vulnerable individuals. Phoebe Hanstuk's death shook Melbourne and resonated far beyond, but for her family, the pain was compounded by frustration and a relentless drive for answers. Fighting an unyielding system from the moment Phoebe was found, her family believed the official story didn't add up. Her parents, Natalie and Len, refused to accept the verdict of accidental death. They felt the investigation was rushed and incomplete. They pushed for a coronial inquest, which finally took place in 2013, 3 years after Phoebe's death. The inquest was a painstaking process that examined witness statements, forensic reports, and expert testimony. Yet despite their hopes, the coroner upheld the accident ruling. Legal battles and public pressure determined, Phoebe's family launched campaigns to raise awareness about her case and questioned the thoroughness of police investigations into deaths like hers. They called for greater scrutiny of suspicious deaths and better support for victims of controlling relationships. The case became a cause célèbre among advocates for victims of domestic abuse, mental health awareness, and justice reform. Anthony Hampel's later life and public scrutiny. Anthony Hampel maintained his innocence, never charged or officially implicated in Phoebe's death, but his reputation was tarnished. His control over Phoebe and his actions in the aftermath sparked intense public debate about the hidden dynamics in seemingly glamorous relationships. Media and cultural impact. Phoebe's story inspired podcasts, documentaries, and true crime discussions worldwide. It became emblematic of how complex, painful, and unresolved such cases can be, especially when mental health and power imbalances are involved. The eerie image of a young woman's body found at the bottom of a garbage chute has left a lasting impression on public imagination. What we still don't know. Despite all the scrutiny, key questions remain unanswered. Was Phoebe's death an accident born of a moment of despair? Did someone push her? Was there a cover-up? Could the tragedy have been prevented with earlier intervention? The broader lessons. Phoebe Hansjuk's case shines a harsh light on the vulnerability of those trapped in controlling relationships, the critical importance of thorough investigations in suspicious deaths, the challenges victims and their families face when seeking justice, the stigma surrounding mental health issues, and how it can obscure the truth. Remembering Phoebe more than a decade later, Phoebe's family continues to honor her memory, not just as a tragic figure, but as a bright, complicated, and deeply loved young woman who deserved more time, more care, and more justice. They advocate for stronger protections, better mental health resources, and increased awareness of the signs of domestic coercion and abuse. Closing thoughts. Phoebe's death remains shrouded in mystery, a haunting riddle of a woman who fell, or was pushed, down a garbage chute in an apartment building designed to protect and conceal. Her story is a stark reminder that sometimes the most tragic crimes happen behind closed doors, under the veneer of wealth and normalcy, and that the search for truth and justice is never easy, but it is always worth fighting for.
The disappearance of Asher Degree 2000. On the surface, the Degree family lived an ordinary life in Shelby, North Carolina. Harold and Aquila Degree were devoted parents. Their home was modest but full of love, structure, and faith. Their two children, O'Brien and Asher, were well-behaved, polite, and respectful. Two young lives sheltered from the turbulence of the outside world. Asher, in particular, was the kind of child every parent hoped for, sweet, shy, academically focused, and deeply rooted in her family's values. She was just 9 years old. It was this very normalcy, this warm, tight-knit home life, that made what happened next so completely bewildering. On February 14th, 2000, Valentine's Day, Asher vanished. She had left her home in the middle of the night, packing a small backpack and walking out into the rain and darkness. There was no forced entry, no sign of abduction. No one heard a struggle. It was as though Asher had simply slipped between the cracks of her own life and disappeared into a shadow. What could make a quiet, happy, church-going fourth grader sneak out of her home in the dead of night and vanish without a trace? That question has haunted her family and the nation for over 2 decades. The timeline begins on February 13th, 2000, a Sunday. It was an ordinary day. Asher and her brother had attended church with their parents in the morning, followed by lunch with relatives. In the afternoon, the kids played and relaxed. Asher had a small argument with her basketball team earlier that weekend when they lost a game, her first time fouling out. But according to her parents, it hadn't seemed like something serious enough to dwell on. They reassured her that mistakes were part of life. By evening, the power in their neighborhood had gone out due to a car accident. The Degrees had an early bedtime, and the blackout only accelerated their routine. The children were sent to bed by 9 p.m., and the house fell quiet. Around 12:30 a.m., Harold Degree returned from his late shift at work. He peeked into his children's shared room and saw both Asher and O'Brien asleep in their beds. Everything was normal, nothing out of place, but sometime between then and 6:30 a.m., something extraordinary happened. When Aquila Degree woke up that Monday morning, she went to rouse the children for school. O'Brien was there, rubbing his eyes, still sleepy. Asher's bed, on the other hand, was empty. At first, Aquila thought perhaps Asher had gotten up early and gone to the bathroom, or was somewhere else in the house. But after a frantic search of every room, closet and corner, the truth dawned: Asher was gone. Her school clothes were still laid out neatly on the chair, untouched. Her basketball uniform from the game was still in her gym bag. Nothing else in the house had been disturbed. No broken windows, no open doors, no signs of forced entry. Panic set in. Aquila called her husband, then the police. A missing persons report was filed by 6:45 a.m., and by 7 o'clock police were on the scene. Search dogs were brought in, neighbors were questioned. The woods nearby were combed inch by inch, but what investigators found that first day wasn't what they expected. 2 truck drivers and a motorist had come forward to say they'd seen a small child walking along Highway 18 around 4 a.m. that morning, just outside of Shelby. The girl had been alone, walking southbound in the pouring rain, wearing a long-sleeved white shirt and white pants. One of the drivers had even tried to turn around and check on her, but she had darted into the woods and disappeared before he could reach her. The child matched Asher's description perfectly. That revelation changed everything. This wasn't an abduction in the traditional sense. Asher had apparently left on her own accord. But why? She had no history of running away, no documented behavioral issues, no problems at school or at home. She wasn't allowed internet access. She had no cell phone, and this was the year 2000. There was no social media or text messaging to trace. Her parents were beside themselves. "We didn't have any warning," Aquila would later say. She was happy. She was loved. What made her walk away from that? The mystery only deepened as searchers widened their radius. Over the next 48 hours, authorities mounted an enormous ground search. Volunteers joined officers, trudging through mud and thickets in hopes of finding a trace, anything, a scrap of fabric, a footprint, a sign of life. Then they found something. About a mile from the Degree house, searchers discovered several personal items near a shed at Turner's Upholstery, including candy wrappers, a pencil, a marker, and a Mickey Mouse hair bow that Asher's family confirmed belonged to her. This suggested she had been there at some point, possibly taking shelter from the rain. Then the trail went cold. No further signs, no more items, no indication of where she went next. Days turned into weeks. Asher's story made the local and national news. Her schoolmates held vigils. Flyers were posted across counties. Tips poured in, some helpful, some not. Rumors of sightings stretched across states. Psychics and amateur sleuths offered their theories. None of it brought Asher home, and then over a year later a chilling discovery changed the course of the case again. In August 2001, about 26 miles north of Shelby, a contractor digging in a rural area of Burke County unearthed a plastic trash bag. Inside was another black plastic bag, and inside that, folded carefully, was Asher Degree's backpack. It had been buried on purpose. Inside were several of her belongings, including her pencil box and a copy of a children's book titled Dr. Seuss's McElligot's Pool. One detail in particular baffled investigators. Neither the book nor a t-shirt found inside the bag had come from the Degree home. No one in the family had seen them before. That was the last confirmed evidence ever recovered in her case. The find offered a new location for investigators to focus on, but it also raised disturbing questions. Who had buried the backpack? Why were items in it unfamiliar to her family? Was someone helping her, or had she encountered a stranger with dark intentions? In the years since Asher disappeared, there have been countless theories. Some believe she was lured out by someone she knew, perhaps someone she had met at school or church who convinced her to leave. Others think she may have read or seen something that inspired her to run away in search of an adventure, only to fall victim to foul play along the way. A few believe her disappearance was the result of a tragic accident. Maybe she got lost in the woods, hurt, and her body was never found. But that doesn't explain the buried backpack, or the items inside that didn't belong to her, or the sighting of her running into the trees. What remains clear is that someone somewhere knows more than they've ever admitted. The FBI has been involved for years. Billboards went up. Age-progressed photos have been released periodically, showing what Asher might look like now. Her parents still live in the same house, still celebrate her birthday, and keep her memory alive with an annual walk on Valentine's Day, the day she vanished. "She's our Valentine baby," Aquila once said. "We'll never stop looking." More than 2 decades later, Asher Degree's disappearance remains one of the most heartbreaking and confounding unsolved mysteries in modern true crime. In the days and weeks after Asher Degree vanished, her community was transformed. A town that once found comfort in its quiet neighborhoods and familiar rhythms now looked over its shoulder. Parents held their children a little tighter, locked their doors a little earlier, and they whispered the same question over and over again. Why would a happy 9-year-old girl walk out of her house in the dead of night? Let's explore the theories, evidence, and strange occurrences that emerged after her disappearance, each one painting a different picture of what might have happened to Asha. Theories from day one. Did Asha run away? From the beginning, law enforcement and media reports hinted at the possibility that Asha had run away from home. It seemed unthinkable, especially considering her age, background, and behavior. But the eyewitness sightings and the personal items found a mile from her home did suggest she had intentionally left the house. Still, her parents strongly rejected the idea. She was afraid of the dark, her mother, Aquila, often said. She wouldn't go outside alone, especially not in the rain. That just wasn't her. And yet there were signs, subtle ones, that Asha had made plans. A few days before she disappeared, Asha's 4th grade class had been reading the book The Whipping Boy, a children's story about 2 boys who run away from home and go on an adventure. Some believe that the story might have influenced her imagination. What if Asha wasn't running away from something, but towards something? Her family remembered her excitement about Valentine's Day, which was the day she disappeared. There were treats and parties planned at school. She had even prepared her class Valentine cards ahead of time. This doesn't fit the profile of a child looking to flee her life. But maybe, just maybe, she thought she was going somewhere exciting. Somewhere she believed she'd be safe. Asha was lured. Another theory is far darker, that Asha may have been groomed or lured by someone she knew. Someone who had gained her trust without the knowledge of her parents or teachers. Could someone have befriended her at school or church and planted the idea of an adventure? Could they have manipulated her into thinking she was embarking on something special? In this theory, the plan wasn't hers, it was planted. She may have packed her book bag quietly, tiptoed through the house, and slipped out to meet her friend, believing it was part of a game or story. If that's the case, then the candy wrappers and items found in the shed might have been hers, but left behind while she waited for someone who never should have arrived. Then again, nothing was found in her bedroom to suggest such a plan. There were no diaries, no notes, no signs of secret communication. This person, if they exist, would have had to be incredibly manipulative, careful, patient, and good at remaining unseen. The backpack discovery, a vital clue. The backpack discovered in 2001, buried along a rural road nearly 30 miles away, remains one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the case. It was double wrapped in garbage bags and buried, deliberately. Someone didn't just want to dispose of it, they wanted to make sure it wouldn't be found. Why? Some have speculated that Asha may have made it to a vehicle, hitched a ride, or was picked up, and then something went horribly wrong. The person may have taken her, realized things were spiraling, and got rid of the evidence. What complicates things is that some of the items in the bag were unfamiliar to her family. A shirt and a book they didn't recognize. Where did those come from? Could she have packed them herself? Acquired them while she was away, or were they planted? It's details like these that keep the case murky. For every solid clue, a new question appears. The sightings, was she really seen on the highway? Multiple witnesses reported seeing a young girl matching Asha's description walking along Highway 18 around 3:45 to 4:15 a.m. on the day she vanished. One driver saw her walking alone in the rain, holding something. Another saw her run into the woods when he circled back. These accounts were consistent, and they were terrifying. What would compel a child who was afraid of the dark to brave a cold, rainy highway in the middle of the night? One theory is that she was trying to reach a destination on foot, perhaps under the belief she was meeting someone who lived nearby, or at a designated place. But if that were the case, it would suggest a level of planning or outside influence that has never been fully identified. She didn't have a map, money, or any survival supplies. No flashlight, no coat, and again she was 9 years old. If those sightings were accurate, then Asha must have had some strong belief that she knew where she was going, or at least that someone was going to meet her there. But nothing else was ever found in that area. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, no follow-up sightings.
It was like she vanished into thin air. The internet sleuths and the deep dive over the years, online communities have taken up Asher's case with fervor. Reddit threads, YouTube videos and blogs have tried to make sense of the limited clues. Some have speculated she might have been taken by a passing motorist with bad intentions. Others have developed elaborate timelines comparing her movements with local registered offenders, even pointing out odd parallels between her case and other disappearances in North Carolina. A few theorists believe her disappearance may have involved a member of the school or church community, someone who wasn't initially suspected. Unfortunately, none of these leads have led to anything concrete. FBI and renewed interest in 2020, the FBI publicly re-released information on Asher's case, hoping to reignite interest. They offered a $25,000 reward for any information leading to her recovery. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children added another $20,000 to the reward. More importantly, the FBI also announced they had new leads and were looking for anyone who had seen a specific car, a 1970s model Lincoln Continental or Ford Thunderbird, seen in the area around the time of Asher's disappearance. That vehicle has never been identified. What this suggests is that federal investigators may have more evidence than they've made public. It's possible someone had been watching Asher or her neighborhood for some time. It's also possible that key witnesses have stayed silent all these years. In missing child cases, time is the enemy, but time can also bring clarity. DNA advancements, new witnesses, even deathbed confessions. Family still holds on. Asher's parents have never stopped hoping for answers. They still keep her bedroom the same. They still lead a walk every Valentine's Day. And they've never changed their phone number, just in case she tries to call. "I don't care how old she is," Iquilla said in one interview. "I just want to know what happened. And I want whoever did this to her to know they didn't break us." O'Brien Degree, Asher's older brother, who had shared a room with her that night, still struggles with guilt. "I feel like I should have woken up," he once said. "I should have noticed, but no one blames him. Because whatever happened to Asher, whatever made her leave that night, it was hidden, careful and terrifyingly silent." Asher Degree's story is one that unsettles the soul. Not just because of the tragedy at its center, a child vanishing without a trace, but because of the overwhelming silence that followed. No demands, no confessions, no confirmed sightings, just an eerie absence that lingers for decades. In this third part of the documentary, we're going to widen the lens, examining the broader themes, the parallels to other cases, and the possible cultural biases that shape the search and public interest. We'll also explore how the media, law enforcement, and the true crime community each played a role in either pushing the case forward or allowing it to fade. And at the center of it all remains one simple truth: Asher Degree, a bright, joyful 9-year-old, disappeared from her home and has never been found. Let's try to understand the deeper forces at play. Patterns of disappearance. Are there similar cases? It's easy to view Asher's case as unique because it is rare. Most child abduction cases involve a known suspect, a family member, a close family friend, or someone with a previous connection. And very few children under the age of 10 leave home voluntarily in the middle of the night. That alone places Asher's case in an unusual category. But it's not completely alone. In 1989, 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling was abducted at gunpoint while riding bikes with his brother and a friend near their Minnesota home. His case went cold for decades before a breakthrough finally came, one that ended in a confession and a recovered body, more than 25 years later. Another case is that of Kyron Horman, a 7-year-old boy who disappeared from his school in Portland, Oregon, in 2010. Despite heavy media attention and thousands of leads, Kyron has never been found. Then there's the story of Tionda and Diamond Bradley, sisters aged 10 and 3, who disappeared from their Chicago apartment in 2001 while their mother was at work. The girls left a note, but it didn't explain much. Their case remains unsolved to this day. What links these cases to Asher's isn't just their tragic nature, it's the lack of resolution. In each, families have endured decades without closure. In each, the public has cycled through interest and apathy. And in each, the deeper question isn't just what happened, but how it could have happened without anyone noticing. Was race a factor in public awareness? This is a difficult but important topic. In the world of missing persons, it has long been observed that the media tends to focus far more attention on missing white children than children of color. The term missing white woman syndrome was coined to describe this pattern, where cases involving young white, often middle-class females receive disproportionate media coverage compared to similar or even more severe cases involving black, indigenous, or Latina victims. Asha Degree was a young black girl living in a working-class neighborhood in North Carolina. While her case did receive local media coverage and was taken seriously by law enforcement, it never reached the fever pitch of national cases like Elizabeth Smart, John Bennett Ramsey, or J.C. Dugard. Would Asha's disappearance have played differently in the public imagination had she looked different? Would there have been more pressure on investigators, more media attention, more community involvement? Her mother, Iquilla, has often spoken about this. If she had been blonde with blue eyes, they would have shut down every highway in the state, she once said. But she was just a little black girl from a small town. It's a painful thought, but one that cannot be ignored. True crime content creators, investigators, and media outlets are slowly becoming more aware of this imbalance. But the damage of that early silence can't be undone. Leads go cold, witnesses forget. And cases that don't trend often get buried beneath the next breaking headline. Asha's home life, hiding in plain sight. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Asha's case is the lack of any clear motive. She wasn't being abused. There was no drama or chaos in the home, no bullying at school, no trauma that anyone knew of. Her parents were strict but loving. They monitored TV time, limited outside influences, and were active in her life. Asha was enrolled in church and basketball. Her days were filled with school, family, and routine. But what if something was happening that no one knew about? One theory posits that Asha may have been keeping a secret, something she was ashamed of, or afraid to reveal. Some believe she may have felt pressure to be perfect, to meet expectations, and perhaps panicked over a mistake or misunderstanding. This theory, however, is speculative. There's no hard evidence to suggest it. What's more likely is that if there was something wrong, someone outside the home had caused it. And Asha, too young to process the danger, responded not with confrontation, but with escape. Children don't always communicate in words. Sometimes they express fear through action. Leaving in the night could have been her way of saying, "I'm scared," or "I don't understand." But tragically, she never got the chance to explain. The role of technology, what would be different today? In 2000, cell phones were still rare, especially for children. Social media didn't exist. Home security cameras weren't common in rural neighborhoods, and digital footprints were practically non-existent. Today, Asha's disappearance might have played out very differently. She might have had access to a phone or a tablet. There might have been online messaging records, GPS pings, Wi-Fi connections, or surveillance footage. Her route might have been traceable. The car seen on the highway might have been caught on a dashcam or traffic light camera. But back then, none of that existed. Investigators had to rely on witness statements, physical searches, and traditional methods. The search grid was massive, and the window of opportunity was narrow. It's chilling to think how many answers might have been found with today's tools. And yet, even now, with facial recognition, DNA matching, and advanced behavioral profiling, Asha remains missing. It reminds us that some mysteries still resist even our most powerful tools. The psychology of unsolved cases for Asha's family, and for many families of missing persons, the hardest part isn't grief. It's the absence of closure, not knowing, wondering every day whether to mourn or hope. There's a particular cruelty in this kind of disappearance. It creates a psychological limbo, one where every unknown person becomes a maybe, every dream a message, every knock at the door, a possibility. Over time, this can take a toll on a family's mental and emotional health. Some splinter under the weight. Others, like the Degrees, grow more determined. But the ache never fades. The true crime community often speaks of solving cases, but in many instances, what families want most isn't justice, it's understanding. Why did it happen? Where did she go? Was she afraid? Was she alone? Without those answers, the pain continues. Quiet, relentless, lingering in every birthday that passes without a cake. Hope in the unseen. Despite it all, hope persists. Asha would be 33 years old today. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has released multiple age progression photos over the years, showing what she might look like now, each one a haunting reminder of what could have been. Her family still holds out hope that she's alive. That maybe, somehow, she was taken and raised elsewhere. That she's out there and just doesn't know who she is. That one day, she'll discover her real name and come home. It's not impossible. Other children have returned decades later, rescued from captivity, or finding their way back after years of silence. Miracles do happen, and if anyone deserves one, it's Asha Degree. 2.5 decades after 9-year-old Asha Degree vanished from her Shelby, North Carolina home in the early morning hours of Valentine's Day 2000. Her name still echoes in hushed tones through true crime forums, law enforcement circles, and among those who carry the weight of unsolved cases. Asha's disappearance remains as chilling now as it was then, primarily because, despite the initial flurry of media attention and decades of effort, there is still no definitive answer. In this final part of the story, we'll explore how her case affected her family and the broader public. We'll also look into how it changed investigative approaches, inspired legislation, and shaped conversations around child safety and racial disparities in missing persons cases. And finally, we'll take one more careful walk through the remaining clues, those small stubborn facts that continue to whisper to anyone still listening. Let's return to the story of a girl who vanished, and a world that hasn't stopped searching. A family that refused to give up from the moment Asha disappeared. Her family made a conscious choice. They would never let her story go cold. Harold and Aquila Degree became more than parents to a missing child. They became advocates, spokespeople, educators, and above all, persistent reminders that behind every missing persons report is a family whose life was split in two before and after. They established an annual walk on or near the anniversary of her disappearance, where members of the community join hands and retrace Asha's last known steps. What began as a gesture of grief grew into a tradition of hope and solidarity. People who had never known Asha came to walk. Some traveled from other towns, some from other states. All carried the same message: you are not forgotten. Each year, the Degrees partnered with the FBI and local law enforcement to host press conferences. These events were not just symbolic, they were strategic. By keeping Asha's name in the news, they hoped someone, somewhere, might finally come forward. After all, someone knew something. That fact had never been in doubt. The Degrees have also been outspoken about systemic issues. Aquila, in particular, has been vocal about how missing black children often receive less attention, fewer resources, and less media coverage. In doing so, she gave her daughter a voice even after that voice had gone silent. "We were a regular family," she once said. "We did everything right. And yet this happened. If it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone." Child safety and the Asha Degree effect. While it may not be officially recognized in federal law, Asha's case helped contribute to a growing awareness of the need for better child safety education, especially in rural and lower-income communities. In the early 2000s, awareness campaigns became more prevalent in schools. Stranger danger presentations were reintroduced in curricula. Parents began having more direct conversations with their children about personal safety and boundaries. Law enforcement also began re-evaluating how they classified and responded to missing children. One of the key realizations was that runaways should not always be dismissed as voluntary disappearances. A child, especially one under the age of 10, rarely leaves home for no reason. When they do, it often signals a deeper issue, be it grooming, abuse, coercion, or trauma. The case of Asha Degree forced many departments to consider that a child walking away in the middle of the night might not be running from something, but rather, lured towards something. And that reframing changed everything. The FBI's reinvigoration of the case, in 2020, 2 decades after Asha vanished, the FBI, in cooperation with the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to her whereabouts. This was not a mere ceremonial gesture. It was accompanied by a renewed commitment to examining evidence using modern forensic techniques. As part of this, investigators reprocessed her backpack, which had been discovered buried off the highway over a year after she disappeared, in an effort to extract DNA or trace evidence that may have been overlooked at the time. Around the same time, the FBI also revealed that they had received a tip from a witness who had seen Asha get into a dark green 1977 model Ford Thunderbird, or Lincoln Mark IV, on the morning of her disappearance. This vehicle had never been previously mentioned. That small detail sparked a surge of new interest in the case. But once again, the trail ran cold. Revisiting the backpack. Let's return to that pivotal piece of physical evidence, Asha's backpack. When it was discovered in 2001, more than a year after her disappearance, it was double-wrapped in plastic and buried along a construction site near Morganton, some 26 miles from her home. That detail alone was chilling. It meant that someone had not only taken the backpack, but had also deliberately hidden it far from where it was likely to be found. Inside the backpack were her school supplies and personal items. But what most disturbed investigators was a Dr. Seuss book that had been checked out from her school library, and a New Kids on the Block t-shirt. Neither item could be positively identified as Asha's. The book was confirmed to have come from her school, but it wasn't checked out in her name. The t-shirt, meanwhile, was never recognized by her family. This suggested one terrifying possibility: someone had deliberately placed those items in her bag, perhaps to mislead investigators. Or worse, perhaps she had encountered someone who had brought those things to gain her trust. To this day, the origin of those items has never been explained. The offender profile, what the experts think in long unsolved cases. Behavioral profilers often step in to provide insights into the likely offender. In Asha's case, several disturbing but consistent conclusions have been drawn. The person likely knew the area. The route she took, the way the bag was buried, these all suggest someone local, or someone with intimate knowledge of rural North Carolina. They may have been watching her. It's possible Asha had been groomed, subtly, over time, perhaps by someone she encountered at school, church, or in the neighborhood. Someone who knew her routines, her vulnerabilities, and how to exploit her innocence.
They were methodical. Whoever buried the backpack was careful. Wrapping it in plastic indicates a level of forethought, a desire to preserve or protect evidence, whether to hide it or return to it later. There is also a strong belief among investigators that more than one person may know what happened. In cases like this, secrets are rarely kept forever. People talk, guilt surfaces, circumstances change. All it takes is one voice. A legacy of unfinished questions. Asha Degree would be 33 today. In some alternate version of reality, she's grown, married, with a job she loves, and maybe children of her own. In that version, she never left her bed on a rainy Valentine's night. In that version, she's safe. But in our world, she is still missing. And her case remains a symbol of how quickly a quiet life can become a haunting mystery. Yet even amid the heartbreak, her story has accomplished something. It has kept the conversation alive. It has taught communities not to underestimate a child's vulnerability. It has challenged media biases. It has drawn together parents, police, and strangers alike in the name of justice. And it reminds us that behind every unsolved case is not just a mystery, but a child, a daughter, a sister, a student, a person. Asha Degree, still missed, still loved, still out there. The disappearance and death of Mitris Richardson, 2009. Mitris Richardson was a young woman whose life was filled with promise and promise cut short under circumstances that sparked confusion, grief, and anger. Her story begins on a warm evening in Malibu, California, in the summer of 2009, a night that would become a haunting mystery for years to come. Mitris was 24 years old, a recent college graduate with a bright future. Friends and family described her as ambitious and creative, someone who had worked hard to overcome challenges and was eager to build a life for herself. Yet beneath her achievements, Mitris struggled with mental health issues that often went unnoticed or misunderstood. That evening, Mitris dined at a restaurant in Malibu, where her behavior caught the attention of staff and other patrons. Described as erratic, she was reportedly confused and unsettled, exhibiting signs of distress. When the police arrived, she was arrested, not for a violent crime, but for not paying her restaurant bill. However, those closest to Mitris knew her as a kind person, caught in a difficult moment. Her arrest set in motion a tragic sequence of events. After being taken to the local sheriff's station, Mitris was held for a short time and then released alone and at night, with no means of communication or transportation. She was sent back into the dark, with no phone, no car, no one to help her navigate the wilderness that surrounded Malibu. This decision would haunt the officials involved and shake the community. The area around Malibu is known for its rugged terrain and dangerous cliffs, a place where the outdoors can be unforgiving for anyone unfamiliar with it, especially at night and in a vulnerable state. Once released, Mitris vanished. She left no trace, no clear indication of where she was headed. Friends, family, and law enforcement searched desperately. The hours and days following her disappearance became a blur of anxious hope and mounting fear. Questions multiplied. Why was she released without support or supervision? Was there a failure in protocol? Could the tragedy have been prevented? These questions would resonate deeply in the years ahead. The investigation into Mitris's disappearance unfolded amid growing scrutiny of the sheriff's department and how it handled her case. It became a symbol of systemic failure, of mental health neglect, racial bias, and institutional indifference. Mitris was African American, and many argued that her treatment reflected broader issues of racial injustice within law enforcement. Advocates pointed to disparities in how minorities with mental health struggles are treated, calling for reforms to protect vulnerable individuals. As the weeks turned into months, the search for Mitris remained active but fruitless. Her family refused to give up, organizing search parties, speaking to media, and pleading for answers. Their pain was raw and visible, a testament to the heartbreak of not knowing the fate of a loved one. Nearly a year after she disappeared, a grim discovery brought the mystery to a tragic close. Mitris's remains were found deep in the wilderness near Malibu, far from where she was last seen. Her body showed no obvious signs of trauma or foul play, leaving the cause of death unclear. The lonely setting of her final resting place, a remote, wild area where the ocean winds howl and darkness quickly envelops the land, added a haunting quality to the story. It was a place where isolation and danger intertwined, a place that seemed to echo the loneliness Mitris must have felt in her final hours. The official reports concluded that her death was due to natural causes, possibly linked to dehydration or exposure. Yet this explanation felt inadequate to many, raising more questions than it answered. What had happened in the time between her release and her death? Was she wandering, trying to find help? Did she fall or get injured? Was there someone else involved? The mystery endured, unresolved. Mitris's disappearance and death became a rallying point for mental health advocates and civil rights groups. It highlighted the urgent need for better training for law enforcement in handling individuals experiencing mental health crises. It also exposed glaring gaps in the system designed to protect people like Mitris. Her story is not just one of loss but of systemic failure, how a young woman in distress was let down by those sworn to protect her. It reminds us of the dangers faced by the mentally ill and marginalized, especially when they encounter institutions ill-equipped to understand or assist them. For the Richardson family, the wounds remain fresh. Their fight for justice and understanding continues, as they honor Mitris's memory and call for change to prevent future tragedies. The case has since inspired documentaries, articles, and advocacy campaigns aimed at raising awareness. It challenges society to confront uncomfortable truths about race, mental health and responsibility. In retelling Mitris Richardson's story, we enter a world where hope and despair collide, where the shadows of neglect and injustice loom large. It is a story that demands attention, not just as a crime to be solved, but as a human tragedy that calls for compassion and action. The days and weeks after Mitris Richardson's disappearance were marked by a frantic search and an escalating sense of despair for her family and friends. The initial shock that a vibrant young woman had vanished without a trace slowly morphed into frustration and confusion as official efforts seemed to stall. Her family held vigils, distributed flyers and spoke to the media, hoping to keep the case in the public eye. They described Mitris as intelligent, kind and full of promise, a woman who had faced her struggles but was never a danger to herself or others. The version of Mitris that was emerging publicly conflicted starkly with the image painted by the sheriff's department, who had portrayed her as difficult and unstable. This contradiction highlighted a key tension in the case: how mental health is understood and portrayed by authorities versus the lived reality of the person struggling. Mitris's behavior the night she was arrested was likely a manifestation of a deeper emotional or psychological crisis, yet her vulnerability was met with punishment, not care. The fact that she was released at night, with no phone, no money and no transportation, raised serious questions about police procedure and responsibility. Usually, protocols for releasing detainees call for ensuring they have safe ways to get home or access to assistance. But in Mitris's case, those safeguards were ignored or inadequately applied. The terrain around Malibu is treacherous, with steep hills, thick brush and no streetlights in many areas. For someone unfamiliar with the area, or in a confused or impaired state, it can quickly become disorienting and dangerous. Survivors of similar experiences have described the landscape as alien and unforgiving, a place where it's easy to get lost and hard to find your way back. Despite extensive searches, including volunteers combing hillsides and helicopter patrols, scanning from above, no sign of Mitris appeared for months. The silence was deafening. The longer she remained missing, the more the case took on a sense of tragic inevitability. Meanwhile, public interest sparked debates about race and policing in California and beyond. Many activists pointed to Mitris's experience as emblematic of systemic issues affecting African Americans and other minorities. They argued that racial bias, conscious or unconscious, contributed to the decisions made by law enforcement that night. A comparison was often drawn to similar cases where white individuals experiencing mental health crises were treated differently, provided with support rather than abandoned. The racialized disparities in mental health care and criminal justice became a focal point of criticism and calls for reform. The sheriff's department found itself under intense scrutiny. Internal reviews were launched, and some officers involved in the release faced disciplinary action. However, for the Richardson family, these responses felt insufficient. They sought accountability not just for mistakes made, but for the deeper structural failures that allowed such a tragedy to happen. As months turned into nearly a year, hope faded into heartbreak when hikers discovered Mitris's remains in the wilderness outside Malibu. The location was isolated, difficult to reach, and far from any obvious path or shelter. It was a place where the silence of nature weighed heavy and time seemed to stand still. The discovery reignited public attention, but also brought profound sorrow. The body's condition made it impossible to determine a precise cause of death, and toxicology reports revealed no substances that could conclusively explain her demise. There were no signs of foul play, but the mystery of what happened in her final hours remained unsolved. Experts suggested exposure to the elements, heat, dehydration, or hypothermia, could have been factors. Given the harsh terrain and Mitris's vulnerable state, it was plausible she became lost, disoriented, and unable to call for help. Yet the unanswered questions haunted everyone involved. Why had she been released in such a dangerous manner? Could better intervention have saved her? What was happening inside her mind during those final hours? The ambiguity deepened the tragedy. Mitris's case became a catalyst for change. Her family, along with advocacy groups, pushed for reforms in how law enforcement handles individuals experiencing mental health crises. They campaigned for better training, improved protocols for detainee release, and stronger support systems to prevent anyone else from facing the same fate.
Their efforts contributed to legislative proposals aimed at integrating mental health professionals into crisis response teams. The goal was to replace punitive measures with compassionate care, recognizing that mental illness requires understanding, not punishment. The case also sparked conversations about the importance of community awareness and early intervention. Mental health advocates stressed that individuals like Mitris often fall through the cracks due to stigma, lack of resources, and systemic neglect. Mitris's disappearance and death became a stark reminder that when society fails its most vulnerable, the consequences can be devastating. Her story highlighted the intersection of mental health, race and justice, forcing a reckoning with uncomfortable truths. For those who knew her, Mitris remained a symbol of lost potential and the human cost of institutional failure. Her memory inspired ongoing efforts to build a more just and humane system, one where no one is abandoned in the dark, alone and forgotten. As this chapter of the story closed, the shadow of Mitris Richardson lingered, urging us to listen, to learn and to act with compassion. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a powerful call to protect those at the margins and to ensure that no disappearance goes unanswered. In the aftermath of Mitris Richardson's death, the spotlight on the Malibu Sheriff's Department intensified. Questions swirled about how such a young woman could be released into the night without any support, especially given her evident distress. Was this a tragic oversight, negligence, or something more systemic? The answers proved frustratingly elusive. Investigations into the department's handling of Mitris's case revealed multiple concerning gaps. Protocols designed to safeguard vulnerable detainees seemed to have been ignored or applied inconsistently. Records showed that officers had reported Mitris behaving erratically and not responding to instructions. Yet rather than providing her with medical or psychiatric care, the decision was made to release her. The timing was critical. Mitris was freed at around 1:30 a.m., deep into the night when the streets were empty and help harder to find. Without a phone, money, or transportation, she was left to navigate a landscape completely unfamiliar and dangerous. The officers involved stated they believed she was capable of taking care of herself. However, many argued this judgment was flawed, influenced by misunderstanding mental health symptoms and a lack of empathy. Advocates pointed out that her vulnerability was not just a personal matter, but a reflection of institutional shortcomings. Meanwhile, Mitris's family and supporters demanded transparency and accountability. They pushed for the release of body camera footage, police reports, and communication logs related to her arrest and release. These documents painted a picture of confusion, poor communication, and lack of coordination within the department. The public's response grew louder and more critical. Protests and vigils called attention to the broader issues highlighted by Mitris's case: racial disparities in policing, the neglect of mental health care, and the failure of systems meant to protect. In particular, mental health professionals emphasized the need for crisis intervention teams, specialized units trained to handle situations involving individuals in psychological distress. Such teams could offer de-escalation, assessment, and connection to support services instead of incarceration or abandonment. This model has been adopted in some cities with promising results, reducing arrests and improving outcomes for people in crisis. Mitris's story became a rallying cry for wider adoption of such reforms. On a personal level, Mitris's friends described her as resilient and full of dreams, fighting her own battles quietly. They shared memories of her laughter, ambition and warmth, reminding everyone that behind the headlines was a real person, not just a statistic. The mystery of what happened during the hours between her release and her death remained painful and perplexing. Some theorized that Mitris tried to find her way back to safety, but became lost in the wilderness. Others speculated she may have suffered a medical event or been too weak to continue. Without clear evidence, the truth slipped further away, locked behind the silence of the wilderness and the limits of forensic science. The remoteness of the discovery site meant that time and exposure had eroded much of the physical clues. Despite this, the emotional and social impact of her disappearance and death was profound. It sparked ongoing conversations about how society treats those with mental illness and the urgent need for compassion and reform. In the years following Mitress's death, her family established foundations and advocacy groups aimed at raising awareness and supporting mental health initiatives. They worked tirelessly to ensure her story was not forgotten, and that her tragedy would serve as a lesson and a catalyst for change. The media coverage, documentaries and public discourse kept her memory alive, ensuring that the issues highlighted by her case remained part of the national conversation. Yet amid these efforts, the void left by her absence remains palpable. For those who loved Mitress, the unanswered questions are a source of ongoing grief. The not knowing what she experienced in those final hours, whether she was in pain or fear, is an ache that time cannot fully heal. Her story stands as a stark reminder that mental health crises require more than criminal justice responses. They demand understanding, care, and systems designed to protect human dignity. As the community reflects on Mitress's life and death, there is hope that her tragedy will lead to a future where no one is released into the night alone and vulnerable, where mental illness is met with support, and where justice is not just a word but a promise kept. Mitress Richardson's story echoes far beyond Malibu's hills. It calls on us all to see, hear, and act for those in need. The story of Mitress Richardson is more than just a tragic disappearance and death. It is a mirror reflecting deep flaws in how our systems handle mental health crises, race, and human vulnerability. As her family, friends, and community continue to grapple with their loss, the wider world is forced to confront uncomfortable truths. One of the lasting legacies of Mitress's case is how it exposed the gaps in law enforcement's approach to mental health. While police officers are often the first responders to individuals in crisis, they are not always equipped or trained to provide the care and understanding necessary. This mismatch can lead to disastrous outcomes, as seen in Mitress's release without support. In the wake of her death, many advocates called for increased funding and training for law enforcement, as well as the integration of mental health professionals into emergency response teams. This model, sometimes called a co-responder program, pairs police with mental health workers to ensure that individuals receive appropriate care, not just detention. Some jurisdictions took steps toward these reforms, inspired in part by cases like Mitress's. However, the progress is uneven and often slowed by political, budgetary, and cultural barriers. The struggle to change entrenched systems is ongoing. The racial dimension of the tragedy cannot be overlooked. Mitress, a young African-American woman, was subject to treatment that many argue was influenced by implicit bias. Studies consistently show that minorities often receive harsher policing and less access to mental health services, contributing to cycles of injustice and tragedy. Her family has been vocal in demanding that these systemic inequalities be addressed head-on. They emphasize that Mitress's story is not isolated, but part of a broader pattern of marginalization and neglect faced by people of color across the United States. The media's role in shaping public perception also came under scrutiny. Early coverage often emphasized Mitress's erratic behavior, without exploring the underlying causes or the context of her struggles. Such framing can perpetuate stigma and hinder empathy. Later reporting sought to humanize Mitress and shed light on the failings that contributed to her disappearance and death. Documentaries, interviews, and investigative journalism played a key role in raising awareness and pressuring authorities to respond. For those close to Mitress, the pain of loss is compounded by the uncertainty and unanswered questions. What exactly happened after she was released? Did she try to find help? Did she suffer from untreated mental illness or a medical emergency? The lack of closure weighs heavily on their hearts. Yet amidst the grief, there is also a determination to honor Mitress's memory by advocating for change. Her story has become a catalyst for conversations about mental health care, racial justice, and police accountability. Community organizations have used her case to educate the public about mental illness, to push for improved crisis intervention, and to fight against the stigma that too often surrounds these issues. Mitress Richardson's disappearance and death serve as a haunting reminder that every individual deserves dignity, compassion, and support, especially when they are most vulnerable. Her life, though tragically cut short, continues to inspire efforts to build a safer, more just society. As society moves forward, the hope is that no one else will be left alone in the dark, without help or hope. That Mitress's story will serve not only as a cautionary tale, but as a beacon for change. Her memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the actions of those fighting to ensure that mental health crises are met with care, not neglect. The tragedy of Mitress Richardson is a call to recognize the humanity in everyone, to reform broken systems, and to never forget the cost of indifference.